Welcome back to my channel for a short Hasselblad episode where I want to pick up on a recent episode where I showed you 8 older XCD lenses, which are all tested here in the studio. I mounted them. I looked into autofocus single, autofocus continuous, how they are sitting on the lens mount of the camera body of the X2D Mark II, and so on and so on. And my conclusion was, out of 8 XCD lenses, I'm going to sell 7. And the only one which in this video I said I will keep was the 120mm macro XCD lens, because that one I focus also very often manually. And by the way, I just recently posted a video where I did shoot this lens tethered, and then it actually works reasonably well. Now, my plans changed. I will still sell 6 out of 8 older XCD lenses, but I will keep the XCD 135mm and the corresponding converter. And first of all, I think it's a question of honesty that I tell you that I reverted my decision on the XCD 135. I think that's what I should do. And second, I want to tell you why, and want to combine it with a topic which I'm interested in for a long time, namely the myth and beauty of compressed landscape photography. Let's kick this off. If you have not yet subscribed to my channel, please do so. Subscribe, hit the notification bell, support my work. For you, it's for free. For me, it means the world because it helps me to grow my channel. Many thanks for that. All right, so where do I stand with my Hasselblad XCD lens portfolio, the lenses I use day in and day out on my X2D Mark II? And in that video I mentioned in the introduction, I showed you the lenses I will definitely keep and shoot. It's the 2 zoom lenses, the new 20-35E, clearly my beloved 35-100E, all the V lenses, so 38, 55, 90V and so on. And of course also the 75P, where I just recently posted a video about this lens on my channel. But I also told you that 7 out of 8 older XCD lenses will go to market. And by the way, I will let you know at the end of the video where you can buy 6 of them, because I intend to sell them quickly, significantly below its market value. So you will find out where you can buy them, and maybe you're interested to pick one of these lenses for your own shooting. But the XCD 135mm will stay with me. And the decision to keep it was triggered by a recent shooting situation. It's actually in the context of a larger shooting for a client, where I did shoot with the 35-100E at 100mm. And the type of photography I was doing, I would call compressed landscape, but compressed landscape in the meaning of the word does not exist. And I will come to that in the course of the video as a little side topic. That's why the video is called The Myth and Beauty of Compressed Landscape. So if you look at that image here, and that's shot with the X2D Mark II and the XCD 35-100E at 100mm. And here my problem is, if I level meter the camera with the level gauge in order to get straight lines, for instance here, then I was always getting this rooftop here in the foreground at the bottom of the frame. And I consider this to be ugly. I wanted the frame actually to start somewhere here where the city starts. And the problem is, of course, I could crop in, right? Easily crop in and get rid of that rooftop here. But I really need every single megapixel for that shooting, because the print we are going to do for the client is a longer story I'm not sharing here. Needs at least 400 to 500 megapixel, which also made me shooting later in panorama stitching mode, and will also use upscaling methods in order to get and achieve this resolution. So I wanted to get rid of that roof without giving up on level metering the camera, and that is only possible with a longer focal length. And the second aspect here is, and now I'm using the keyword, this is what some people call compressed landscape. So the layer in the foreground, the city, and the middle layer, Lake Zurich here, and the background layer, the Swiss mountains, they are compressed together, and I will later formulate a more correct statement about that, because compressed landscape is nothing that really exists, but you see it with your naked eyes. The mountains appear larger than they should. The middle layer is a little bit squeezed between the city layer and the foreground and the mountain layer in the background. And I wanted to even further elevate that effect. And of course, in the portfolio which I decided for, except for the 120mm macro lens, that's end of story. 100mm is basically what I can offer. And the 120mm macro lens I didn't want to use for that shooting here. So I thought, well, maybe I should give the XCD 135mm another try. So I went back to the location with the 135 lens and did shoot the scene. And guess what? The images are fantastic. And they're fantastic in various ways, and I'm going to show them to you in the course of the video, of course. And that triggered my decision to keep that lens. Now, when I complained about these older XCD lenses, I was in particular complaining about autofocus in face detection and face recognition. If you look here, if I'm an autofocus single, and if I here have deactivated subject detection, autofocus actually works pretty reasonable with that lens. And I showed it in that video back then that it also works still reasonable if you mount the converter. And if I show you here, focus found, focus found, focus missed, focus found. Let's go here quickly to face detection. And with most of these older XCD lenses, I was not happy when I started to detect faces. And I think there is a firmware update missing from Hasselblad here for these older lenses, which will come for sure. But look at that, it finds focus. But when I did shoot it with these older XCD lenses, it was kind of a coin flipping game, whether the face was sharp and in focus or not sharp and in focus. But for compressed landscape photography, I intentionally use this phrase again, compressed landscape. This lens here is absolutely fantastic. And you will see this in the images. Absolutely brilliant what this camera lens combination was delivering. That's why I decided afterwards, I'm not selling the XCD 135mm lens. My conclusion was jumping too short. And it is actually hard in the Hasselblad portfolio to find longer focal length. You have 100mm here in the zoom lens, then you have 120 in the macro lens, 135, you can extend it by the X converter, but that's it. Hasselblad doesn't have meaningful tele lenses yet in their portfolio. Maybe that's something they will develop in the future. So this lens will stay with me. And in this video, I want to show you the images, which I think are absolutely convincing. And I want to also quickly talk about that myth and beauty of compressed landscape photography. So let's talk about the myth and beauty of lens compression, my tiny little side topic in this video here. On the left-hand side, you see an iPhone photo at 24mm focal length. On the right-hand side, a Hasselblad photo already cropped in to get the ugly buildings in the foreground away, but at telefocal length of 100mm. And if we compare these two images, on the left-hand side, the mountains in the wide-angle view are just a very small line, very far away at the horizon. On the right-hand side, the mountains at the horizon are clearly visible and very elevated. You see them, it's a bit of a hazy day, but you clearly see them there. And they are much bigger, of course, than on the left-hand side. The foreground buildings on the left-hand side are very dominant in the scene, and the city and the mountains are comparably small. On the right-hand side, the foreground buildings of the city here, they are less dominant in the scene, and the details in the middle layer and background on the left-hand side are hard to see. You have to crop in quite substantially to actually see something of the city. And the details in the middle layer and background on the right-hand side are elevated. And I would say, but that's a matter of taste, of course, an image with a wide angle as we see it on the left-hand side from the iPhone is only beautiful in that perspective if the foreground is an eye-catcher. Here, it's definitely not. That building here in the foreground is definitely nothing to write home about. On the right-hand side, we have a beautiful perspective. We catch a lot of detail of the city. We see Lake Zurich, much bigger than on the left-hand side, and the mountains in the background are a very, very nice horizon with clear structure. And in a way that is really impressive. So that's the differences we have here on that. So much regarding the beauty of an effect, a perception, which a lot of people call lens compression. Let's now talk about the myth and let's clarify what's really going on here. And I want to do this by a little illustration where the sizes and proportions of these symbols, icons do not match the numbers. Otherwise, I would not have been able to squeeze this into one illustration here. And let's say you stand 10 meters away from a near tree, and the near tree is 90 meters away from a far tree. So overall, you have a distance of 100 meters to the far tree. And in this case, illustratively, let's say the far tree appears about 1/10 the size of the near tree, right? That's about right if we assume linear relationships here. Let's now move position and let's move the vantage point of the observer away by another 90 meters. So the distance to the near tree is now 100 meters. The distance between the near tree and the far tree is still 90 meters. And the overall distance of the observer to the far tree is 190 meters. And from this position, because the vantage point has moved out and farther away from the near tree by 90 meters to an all-in 100 meters, the far tree appears now only 1/2 the size of the near tree, which is interesting, right? So what actually happened here is by moving the vantage point 10 times farther from the near tree, we reduce the apparent size ratio between the near and far trees from about 1/10 to about 1/2. Now, what is the role of the lens in all of this? The lens merely dictates how much of that view fits into the frame. And you know that, right? If you have a focal length that is in the tailor area and you want to capture in the frame a larger subject, you have to move away from that subject. If you have a wide-angle lens, then you can actually stand pretty close to a subject and still capture all of that subject in the frame. Or in other words, a wide lens shows a huge angle, forcing you to stand close if you want your subject to fill the frame. So the near tree appears large, the far tree, in our example, shrinks away to an expanded perspective. A tailor lens shows a narrow angle, so you must step back and increase distance to subject to fit the same subject into the frame. From back there, all those distance ratios tighten up to, let's call it, a compressed perspective. In our illustrative example, the distance ratio did actually shrink from 1/10 to 1/2. So, concluding, since we now understand hopefully what happens here, there is no such thing as lens compression. If people use that phrase, lens compression, it's a sloppy formulation. A lens does not bend space. What changes is the vantage point, and with changing vantage point, you have to change the focal length to still fit something into the frame. So different shooting distances require different focal lengths if the subject is supposed to fill the frame. And the farther the camera moves from the subject, the longer the focal length must be to achieve that goal. And as the vantage point recedes, the distance ratios between foreground and background shrink, and this creates a visual impression of compression. Coming back to these images and concluding my little excursion here, clearly the left-hand side here is not as beautiful in terms of perspective as the right-hand side. In particular, if the foreground, like this ugly building here on the left-hand side, is not attractive. But it is a perception that is happening here, and the geometry is changing with the vantage point and not by the lens. The lens and the focal length is just a consequence of your target to fit a subject into the frame, and then you can move closer or you can move farther out, and that changes the perspective. And as I said here in this summary, you get an expanded perspective on a wide-angle lens or a compressed perspective on a tailor lens. And I hope that clarifies the confusion that's going on in the community all the time about lens compression, compressed landscape, what have you. In my particular case, I actually like the phrase compressed landscape, but it would be more correct to say a perception of compressed landscape in the meaning of what I just explained. Let's now move on to at least one sample image shot with the 135 XCD lens on the X2D Mark II, which finally sealed my decision to keep that lens for the perception of compressed landscape, if I want to formulate it correctly now. All right, if you look into Lightroom here, into my Lightroom, of course, there are a bunch of images here, and a lot of them are from Hasselblad. Some of them are from the Fuji GFX100 Mark II, but from a different perspective. I might even post a video about that shooting with the GFX100 Mark II, because for super panoramas, that's also a highly capable camera in the same way as the Hasselblad X2D Mark II. But let's focus on one image only, because the video is already longer than I planned, and that's this one. I discussed this actually today in the afternoon with the client, and he likes the image a lot. It's one image out of a series of images we have to deliver. And you see here, this is already a panorama stitching, and it already has also been scaled up in a certain way to end up at 441.2 megapixel, because as I said earlier in the video, we need a lot of resolution for these large prints, which we are supposed to do. And you see the lens used here is the XCD 135. And I think this is an example which totally convinces me to keep the 135mm lens, because it's such a nice image. And the image is a typical example for the perception. Again, I'm trying to formulate this correctly now, for the perception of compressed landscape photography. And the vantage point in my case was up the hill, so I was far away from all the subjects here in the scene. And in this way, staying with the explanation I provided and the illustration, my distance ratios did shrink. And that gets me the mountains at the horizon very, very close if you look at that. And with beautiful structure and clarity and detail in this evening atmosphere here. And then, of course, you have the typical fog and hazy weather conditions at Lake Zurich here. And the fog was getting stuck kind of between the lake and the mountains, which is a typical scene we have here in Switzerland, not only at Lake Zurich. And then we have, with all its beauty, Zurich city here in front of us in a detail, clarity, and in a beauty you can very likely only generate with these type of cameras. And if we crop in here by 100%, let me go randomly somewhere in here. You see here graffiti and paintings on the walls. You see a lot of details. And it's very important, if you want to print an image in a very large dimension, that the image has enough detail, enough resolution, that if you go closer to the image, you still recognize structure and detail. Otherwise, if the image would not have been shot with this level of detail here, like I was able to do here with the Hasselblad X2D Mark II, then the closer you move to the image, the more everything becomes wishy-washy and you really cannot recognize anything. And that is something which is very important. Look here at the level of detail you have here everywhere. In the buildings, in the city, at the train station, you know, you can read all the signs here. You see tiny little cars, you see the lights of the city. You can even look to some extent into the windows here. Look here at these office buildings. Very interesting what detail you capture. And it's absolutely amazing what this camera lens combination, the X2D Mark II with the XCD 135 is delivering here. So it would really break my heart if I would have been forced, after my statement on YouTube in this previous video, now to sell the XCD 135. Even here, the Großmünster, very famous church, Urania building here, St. Peter Church. You can see what time it was when I had the shooting. You see the lights along Lake Zurich here. All the details are there, and the image quality you get in a perceived compressed landscape photography with the XCD 135 plus the X2D Mark II or the X2D Mark I. I don't think that plays a big role here, because the changes from the X2D to the X2D Mark II do not concern anything for the perception of compressed landscape. Is just absolutely mind-blowing. I really like to peek and poke here. Look at that church here. There is so much going on in that image. And as I said, for a large print, that's absolutely crucial, absolutely essential. The XCD 135 will stay with me. Last but not least, as indicated at the beginning of the video, here's the place where you can purchase one of my XCD lenses, which go into sale. It's the 21mm, the 30, the 45, the 45p, the 65, and the 80. And Eugen picked them up and will sell them for me. He helps me out from time to time. I help him out. And by the way, I also recommend you to sneak into his channel and look around. He has good content, good videos. He is a very experienced photographer, professional, of course. I got to know him quite some years back when he worked for one of the large photography stores here in Zurich. And I think his channel is worth a visit from your side. But most importantly, if you're interested to pick up one of these lenses, contact him, direct message him. He will definitely reply. And for the pricing model, we actually agreed that we sell them for 70% of the average market price. So I'm offering a bargain for you guys here. And he did some research already, for instance, for 45 or 45p, what is on average the offering you get in the secondary market. And then he will deduct 30%. And of course, you're also free to negotiate with him. All right, that's it. That's all I wanted to say and show. I hope you enjoyed this short Hasselblad episode. And if you own the 135mm lens, my recommendation now is to keep it. And that's what I will do. And 100mm for this particular shooting situation was just not long enough. And then in particular, if you do cityscapes, landscapes, in the type of shooting situations you saw in my images, it's absolutely valuable to have the 135mm lens and the image quality. And that's, by the way, something I said in my video back then when I tested all these lenses. The image quality of all of these older XCD lenses is without any doubt, without any flaws, and absolutely fantastic. It's just that the modern features the X2D Mark II now offers with autofocus continuous, quicker autofocus, lenses which are not as loud in the motor, which is moving the glass, are as their predecessors. Of course, they are not leveraging the benefits of this new camera, but if you need it, if you need a longer focal length than 100mm, 120mm XCD lens and 135mm XCD lens, they are super valuable. If you liked that video, don't forget to drop me a thumbs up. Stay tuned on my channel. There's always more to come. Thanks for watching. Stay safe and healthy. And of course, peace out.